Welcome back to the Torque Test channel. Today we take a look at IR's quote-unquote NASCAR gun. This of course being their street legal version they've sold to the masses, as you likely don't have 250 psi of nitrogen at your home in order to run one of these pit guns. That said, we're going to do our best today in the form of multiple motor swaps and porting out this bad boy to see if we can get that performance up, closer to what you might expect from a real NASCAR pit gun running an 80-gallon 175 psi compressor like we are. We're also going to crack things open and show you what differences there are between a retail gun and one in pit lane. Until recently, Ingersoll Rand's Thunder Gun was the only NASCAR wheel gun responsible for zipping off those 5 lugs per wheel on each corner of a pit stop. Chances are, if you're thinking about the sound of a NASCAR pit stop, you're thinking about this gun. The street legal version is no different. It's the fastest RPM half-inch gun IR makes, rated at 10,000 RPMs. We measured this one, sent to us by a kind viewer, Mike M, at 9,300 RPM at the standard 90 psi working pressure these tools are usually rated at, but 10,350 RPM or so at 150 psi. That's a whole lot of rip'ems. This gun is also rated at 625 foot-pounds, which while dimensionally it's the same as an old school 231H, which is sort of our standard on this channel, makes 450. That 625 is eclipsed by the 1000 IR rates their pit gun monster. Despite doing our best to find one, we've never seen one of those pit guns go up for sale, but at $1,500, maybe it's a good thing for the channel. The 232 TGSL, on the other hand, goes for about $200. Certainly up on the non-NASCAR flavor 231C. Ingersoll Rand still sells at $120, but still 1/7 the price of that pit stop powerhouse. We've not thrown too many hats into the ring on our full-size impact rank list when it comes to old school style guns, still sold today, mostly because we're always chasing that dragon of infinite beans on this channel, but perhaps a sort of hopped up version such as this one can make a difference and even rank well. To see if this gun is a good buy in general, we have to see first how it does out of the box against some competition on the dyno before we visit the rank chart. Then we'll try to inject this thing full of steroids and see what we can do with that. We're going to choose the old school IR 231H that your father might have used to go up against this Thunder Gun, which the Thunder Gun's supposed to stomp, as well as a cordless competitor in the form of Makita High Torque, which is one of the more powerful but not the most powerful half-inch cordless options out there. Just for some context, our first test is working torque 5 seconds and forward. Here's the Makita serving the old IR a hot supper. And here's the street legal NASCAR version. $390, 100 foot-pounds up on the 231H, but yeah, not touching that Makita so far. You should know most air guns are biased in reverse, while the majority of cordless favor forward slightly. So with that in mind, let's get into that reverse. This is our max torque test, 10 seconds in that counterclockwise direction. Here's the TGSL up against the old school gun and Makita on screen. So a bit closer to the Makita this time and still well above the 450 foot-pound 231H. That makes, well, yeah, 450 foot-pounds max here. Our last test is at higher pressure, something a gun associated with NASCAR should be all about. And we did see the RPM spike with higher pressure, so let's see it. All 3 on screen again. So about the same percentage-wise, and 70 to 80 foot-pounds down, but quite a spike in the low end with torque out the gate, appreciating those extra PSI pixies for sure. Overall, a good showing from a stock street-legal old-school style gun, we think. But onto the rank chart to see how this stacks up versus the others. Starting down here for now, its 3 power runs are turned into points as 39, 54, and 61. At 7.3 inches long, she's not short for an air tool, but certainly shorter than some of the cordless options out there, and gets 83.6 foot-pounds per inch. That 625 foot-pound claim ended up being pretty spot on in our testing methods, like most old school guns we test, and gets 98 points, meeting 98% of the advertised figure. At $200, that puts its foot-pounds per dollar value score at 45.8, sort of middle of the pack. That totals 381.4, placing this tool into 15th, bumping down the Flex and even the Aircat 1150 in overall points. Not too shabby, pretty close in fact to that Makita. But this tool alone is not the only goodie package we got from our viewer Mike. We were also provided some sweet aftermarket rotors that take 7 and 8 vanes in place of the stock 6. They also come with these phenolic resin rotor blades to replace the stock plastic ones IR switched to many years ago for some reason. When cracking this gun open, one of the first things you'll notice is it's a twin hammer mechanism, one of the most common and popular among today's air impacts. The Thunder gun used in pit lanes has a much rarer and less commonly seen mechanism called a swinging weight mechanism. This stores potential energy in the hammer mechanism as you spin it up while it's off the lug nut, then transfers that energy into the lug nut when engaged by the socket. Its power scales more with higher pressure and higher RPM than any other impact design because of that throttle up before you push it onto the lug nut scenario. But it wouldn't be all that useful in a shop environment where your sockets are not permanently affixed to the gun and you're often not having that space or want to risk the full throttle running up to the fastener sort of situation. That's a quick way to damage something on your customer's car. In NASCAR, they could really care less though, it's all about that speed. A twin hammer mechanism, on the other hand, is a more durable over-the-life tool sort of design, but also doesn't scale power with RPM so much, as the motor, once engaged with a lug nut, is only rotating 360 degrees in between each impact. Basically, it momentarily stops the whole system each time it impacts. That's something you want to happen because it's an efficient transfer of energy, but that means the RPM is similar to the IPM, or impacts per minute, because the tool only impacts once per that 360 degrees of revolution. So this TGSL's 1200 IPM is roughly, on a stuck fastener, a 1200 RPM tool until the lug nut is loose and the motor can rotate freely without impacting. Then it can hit its 10,000 RPM scenario. Just pointing this out because it'll become relevant a bit later. So here in goes the 7-vane rotor and the resin blades that we've soaked in a bit of pneumatic oil. On to the dyno. Here's the 7-vane rotor run versus the stock best case scenario test. .682, quite an increase, and if you'll remember, that Makita High Torque made .689, so right up there with that. I know we're usually data driven, but you can hear this difference in the gun as well. You can tell it's got some more beans. A little bit low in the dynamic torque out the beginning, out of the run though. Not really completely sure what has caused that. But when we did crack it open, we did notice some new polished wear marks on the faceplate though. It seemed evident that the new rotor was rubbing against the aluminum faceplate. When you rest the rotor in the cylinder, you can just barely feel a hair of a lip. Turns out there's about a 1/1000 difference in length, and it appears that the new 8-vane rotor that we're about to use is seeing the same sort of thing dimensionally, as it's the same length as the 7-vane. So on to swapping in that 8-vane rotor. If the 7 was good power-wise, then the 8's got to be even better, right? Let's see, here's the 8-vane on the dyno versus the 7 and the stock TGSL on screen. .654? Up for sure from the stock one, but down from the 7-vane. That surprised us. So .682 is good and all, but this is a NASCAR gun, right? Let's see if we can get some real juice out of it at 150 and 175 psi. Heck, might as well. We didn't exactly ask Mike first if we could do this, so we went with the better to ask for forgiveness than permission route and figured worst case scenario would be buying a new TGSL to ship to Mike. To promote the airflow we'll need for some serious beans, we performed a few tricks we've learned from old timers at the Air Tool Repair Center, which includes deburring and chamfering all the air inlet and exhaust ports where accessible, and gasket matching with a razor blade where necessary. We also use 4 increasingly sized 1/64 of an inch stepped drill bits to pour out these air cylinder exhaust holes. Almost like a high boost turbo car, a pressurized air tool is often all about efficiently getting rid of that air volume so that it doesn't act as a restriction in getting more in. Air motors operate as sort of differential air pressure motors. The quicker you can turn this part of the cylinder into 0 or close to it, psi, the more time this end of the rotor is spent with higher pressure behind its rotor blades. Of course, this is a balancing act. We chamfered the inside lips of these holes that we drilled out, then polished the cylinder smooth for minimal wear. Then 1 to 2 more secret tricks that old timers have taught us about these old school impacts before we button it up. Now for her maiden voyage, let's see what a TTC version of a NASCAR gun can do. "727 foot-pounds, cresting that 700 mark, passing the Makita high torque along the way, and making 20% more at the end of the day. Doesn't she just sound happier too? Of course, these mods have come at a slight cost, RPM, whereas before we were at 9,300 at 90 psi, we're now at 8330 with the 7 vane and 8350 with the 8 vane rotors. We didn't think to measure the 7 and 8 before we ported it out, but we believe these were a bit down too, as installing the 6 rotor back into the ported tool brought it up to 9,000, 9,100 or so. Which, as we highlighted in our impact mechanism explanation, would hurt the original pit lane Thundergun, being a swinging weight design that relies on pre-spinning the tool up. But on a twin hammer, the mods we did today are some of the best ways to increase performance, we think, even if when loose that lug nut might be spinning off at 900 RPMs less or so. Let's see if at 175 psi, which is the highest our 80-gallon IR compressor goes, maybe that can solve both matters altogether. So in person, we experienced this as no difference and even told Mike that, but now when we're able to put that data onto the chart, you can see a high dynamic torque at this pressure level, down low, but up top, the ultimate torque it can generate not being too affected by this higher pressure. So let's see now, if this gun were to be ranked on our chart, where would it place now that it's hopped up? Not that we're going to keep it onto our chart, but we want to see. We reran its working and max torque tests. Those numbers are here now. They get turned into some pretty decent points actually. 45, 64, and 74. Same length, but making more beans now, 107 foot-pounds per inch. It's no longer a TGSL really, but it's also not an IR wheel gun. Let's say it gets a 100 max for torque claim. No idea what these custom parts cost, truthfully, so we're saying $240 for the value score, staying roughly the same. That would total 429.7 points, or all the way up into 5th place, bumping down the rigid high torque. Of course, who knows how long this Thundergun will last now that it's making all this power. Even the pit guns had to be rebuilt after nearly every race, enough so that teams complained with issues they had with these guns, and now you see Paoli guns on NASCAR races, just like Indian F1 races, in that pit lane. Either way, this TGSL has to be one of the most peppy examples on the streets today, and we hear Mike is very happy with that fact. If we ever get our hands on a real NASCAR or F1 gun, maybe you have one and want to loan it to us, we'll be sure to come up with a setup that can feed it. To see that happen, make sure you hit subscribe, and thanks as always for watching.